This is Dayne Young from UGA part of the Rivals Network, and alongside Brent and Rollins, my co-host on Film Don't Lie over at UGA And we have a special episode because this will be put in multiple places on the Rival Network because we have Larry Williams with us from TigerIllustrated.com. Again, also part of Rivals as we begin to preview Georgia and Clemson happening in Charlotte in early September. Larry, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, glad to be here. And as a fellow film junkie, I guess I feel like I'm in regal company here.
Brent, I know you've been doing some pretty deep dives into the data with the Clemson Tigers and some film review as well. So I was just going to kick it over to you if you had any initial questions for Larry based on things that you've been seeing and reading.
The biggest thing I would say, and welcome, Larry, it's great to have you, but the biggest thing I would ask is, let's look at the last game against Ohio State and some of the tempo variations that Ohio State did, whether it was going really fast, snapping the ball, really early in the play clock, or waiting till later, shifting or moving right quick and then running a play. Do you think Brent Venables is going to, go through the summer, and he's gone through the summer and say, hey, we're going to adjust to how we do things to handle this specific element?
Brent, I think he probably spent the first 6 hours of the flight or the aftermath of that game in New Orleans in the hotel room and the flight back, resolving that, trying to resolve that, and determining that it wasn't going to happen again, because I think they were really caught off guard. It was really a brilliant, not to get too in the weeds of what happened in the bowl game, but since I think it is applicable for Clemson to this season in general and to Georgia in particular, the previous year when Clemson played Ohio State in the semifinal out in Arizona, as I recall, it was Ohio State came in just with up tempo. That was it in the first half. And that kind of caught Clemson off guard, got them on their heels. I mean, Ohio State was up 16-0 at one point. The game probably would have been over if Ohio State doesn't, if Ohio State cashes in on some red zone opportunities.
Right.
Then in that game against still in Arizona, Clemson makes some stops in the second half and sort of slows that tempo down and then is able to sort of neutralize them, and it's a manageable situation. And so going into the Sugar Bowl, I think the assumption was, they're going to do the same thing they did the last time. And what they did the previous time was formidable, just going strictly tempo. But man, Ryan Day just had a real ace up his sleeve, particularly in the midst of all the, I don't know if y'all remember, but going into that game, the quote unquote controversy was Brent Venables stealing plays and all this and that. And you nailed it, Brent. It wasn't just tempo. It was the mixing of the tempos, going fast, going slow, standing at the line, sort of the fake tempo, I guess, for lack of a better term. Just doing so much to disguise their intentions and flipping the formations and things like that. And so that is obviously a big question going into this game. And at the risk of being long-winded here, Venables actually gave me a little dished it back out to me a few weeks ago at Dabo's sort of media Olympics occasion, extravaganza. Bowling was one of the games that the media played with the coaches, and I had a terrible outing at the bowling part of it. And Brent comes up to me and goes, "Man, what was wrong with you, man? You weren't set before you tossed the ball. You're over here on one of them, then you're over here on the next." And I said, "Yeah, man, that sounds like y'all at the Sugar Bowl." And he said, "Yeah, I know." He said,
"Phenomenal."
He said, "I know, because you wrote about it plenty of times." He was giving it back to me a little bit from my having written plenty during the off season about their inability to get set. So kind of a refreshing little snapshot there. I think that he's able to sort of good naturedly needle me back a little bit while also acknowledging that, yeah, they got to get better at that for sure. Because if one offense has such success against it, that this is kind of a copycat, thing. And so other teams are going to try it, including Georgia. But to your very a long-winded answer to your question, yes, I do think that's pretty high atop their list, is keeping that from happening again.
One, I'm insanely jealous of the access that it sounds like that you guys get over in Clemson, because it's a far different story in Athens to being able to go bowling with media and coaches. That's a new one for me. That sounds so out of the realm. One of the things on the field that I know Georgia fans are concerned about are the Bulldogs players in the secondary, because so many players were lost to the NFL. And Larry, from what I've been seeing from the content over at your site and what you put out on Twitter, some of those same concerns exist for the Tigers with the secondary as well, right?
Yes, they don't have the numbers that they normally have at corner, partly because of a guy with the initials DK, who's now over in Athens, who decided to transfer. I think they are really talented at corner. I mean, Andrew Booth, I think it's only a matter of time before he's a superstar. He's certainly made superstar plays last season with some of his incredible interceptions. That even extended into the recent spring game in April, when he made another play that you normally see receivers make with, those one-handed catches. And so aside from him, you have Mario Goodrich, who I believe is blossoming into a leader type, who's more vocal and assertive. I think also Malcolm Green, I love him. Fred Davis, of course, that's another reason for concern over here, because of the really disturbing car accident that he basically almost killed somebody by going 115 miles an hour in Clemson down one of the highways. And so I don't know that he's going to be suspended for this game, but it would not surprise me at all based on Dabo's track record of handling this type of thing. And so they're not far away from not having many bodies on the sideline at corner, like especially if you substitute your Sam linebacker, Trenton Simpson, in a passing situation for another corner to cover the slot, then you get really thin in a hurry. But I think while that is certainly a concern, especially with the uncertainty surrounding Fred Davis, I think overall Dabo reasonably likes his talent there. They just have to avoid further attrition in the form of either injuries or protocols or whatnot.
It's definitely an area of concern where it's not so much the players that you have, it's the depth part. Just like with Georgia right now in the secondary, it's the depth part with them. But the other part with Clemson for me that's interesting with looking at your team is how much, especially last year, without the traditional superstar receivers that you've had in the past. Now Ross coming back, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, at some point. But how much the team relied on Travis Etienne, both for big plays in the running game, but also big time plays in the passing game. How do you think they go about replacing him as a receiving threat out of the backfield? Because Dixon has just not done it a lot and not had a lot of targets in his career.
No, you're right. And yeah, they did such a great job, really not just last year, but even the year before. I mean, Etienne, his first 2 years, he was a liability in the receiving department. And then the most notable example of his added sort of impact in the passing game was in that semifinal game against Ohio State and Arizona, when Ohio State was so focused on the Clemson's gifted receivers that really Etienne was all, that was really Clemson's only option, was figuring out ways to get him the ball in space. Right. And he was really, that was the difference in that game, I would argue. But I tell you this, guys, I think as far as running back goes in the receiving department, Will Shipley, I'm not saying he's going to be Travis Etienne right out of the gate against Georgia. That would be kind of crazy. But overall, he is going to be a name that I think is going to be very prominent in the college football landscape. Just an absolute playmaker.
True freshman.
Yeah, came in. He was an early enrollee. Super fast, and not just a running back. They're going to move him around. He's already, to me, would be the leader for punt return duties. He was a phenomenal receiver in high school, just tough as nails, far beyond his years in the areas of leadership and respect that he commands from the rest of his teammates. He already has all that, and he hasn't even played it down in college football. I don't think I'm overstating it. I've heard from too many people who are familiar with things on the inside that this kid is just special. And so kind of one of those first world examples of, the rich getting richer, in that you lose Travis Etienne, arguably the best running back in the country, inarguably the best running back in school history. And you still have some pretty talented guys, not just with Shipley, not just with Lynn J. Dixon, but also Kobe Pace he's been running out there with the starters right now. And also Phil Maffa, Dabo and others have compared him to Nick Chubb. I am not saying he's the next Nick Chubb, but he is that type of powerful, explosive back, that type of presence that
another freshman.
That's right. But as far as, last year, they went to Etienne so much out of necessity, mainly because Justyn Ross, Frank Ladson, and Joseph Ngata were on the sideline almost all year. Those are three super talented guys, not just Ross, but Ngata and Ladson as well. And so it was almost it was pretty remarkable that they were able to get the passing game production they did. Amari Rogers had a great year. Cornell Powell came out of nowhere to have a monster year. Now it feels like they're going to be able to get back to the receivers doing the types of things that you're accustomed to seeing Clemson receivers do on the big stage. Also, they are really good at tight end with Braden Galloway and Davis Allen. They think Davis Allen is a future NFL guy. And so I'm not sure that they're going to have the 48 catch guy at the running back spot this year, but I don't necessarily think they're going to have that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much so.
Larry, how much of the receiving that you're talking about is made easier by Justyn Ross being eligible to play medically?
Oh man, it was just that was massive news when he was cleared. And I'll just say, like, I know that when you follow Clemson casually, like, sort of on a national level, stuff sort of gets distorted and misinterpreted, as I'm sure happens to you guys when you see people sort of opining or reporting from a distance on Georgia. And sometimes it's frustrating. But like last season, Justyn Ross is cleared just to come back to practice, but in a decidedly no contact capacity. And so you saw it being reported left and right. Oh, Justyn Ross is back. He's been cleared. Well, no way. Like, this thing was a serious situation because he had a congenital fusion condition in his spine that was discovered, had to undergo a battery of tests and all this and that after surgery. Even after his surgeon cleared him, he still, Clemson still had to sign off on allowing him to play, which is no easy task by itself, because of his history. And so as recently as a week or two ago, we were being told it could legitimately be a coin flip on whether this guy suits up at Clemson again. And so I say all that to say, to underscore just how big it was when he was cleared. You could argue he's the best receiver in the country. I think Clemson certainly feels that way. DJ Uiagalelei said that recently. And now that he's cleared, actually, he still isn't practicing yet, because 30 minutes after the big news came that he was cleared medically, he learned that he was in COVID protocol.
Right.
and so he won't be back until I guess this time next week.
So as a follow-up to that, and Georgia fans will know, last year at the beginning of the year, JT Daniels was cleared by the Docs, but obviously didn't see time until those last 4 games. Does cleared for Ross mean, hey, game 1, snap 1, he's in the slot or wherever it is that they want to put him, and he's seeing 15 targets and playing the full game kind of deal?
I'd be surprised if not. Every indication I get is that over the last few months he has looked unstoppable and has looked the part of a truly elite receiver, and that they were only waiting for all this red tape to be addressed, and then he'd be ready to roll. I detect no concern or I'm not receiving any indication that they're going to have to spend a lot of time phasing him back in, over the course of the early season. I think if there is an acclimation process, perhaps it'll be a few days or a week or whatever during camp, and that by the Georgia game, if all goes well, and there are no unanticipated snags, that he'll be the weapon that I think everybody remembers.
You mentioned DJ Uiagalelei, and shame on me for not mentioning him sooner in this podcast, because he's among the Heisman favorites, and the expectations are super high for him. But this comes after 2 transcendent college legendary quarterbacks in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. Is he of that caliber?
That's the belief. Now, it's really the interesting part of this is sort of differentiating between elite generational quarterback and Trevor Lawrence level quarterback, because those are 2 different things in my opinion. Trevor arrived at Clemson as Polished and as flawless a quarterback, I think, as you're ever going to find. And I think, and correct me if y'all don't agree, but I think that's the reason that, you saw all this conjecture initially that he could have been a number 1 pick without playing a down of college football. I tend to think he could have, maybe not, but the point is.
Well, I would agree. He's 100% the best draft prospect, I think, in the last 30 to 40 years.
Yeah.
Personally.
Guys like that just don't come around often. So mistake to assume that, since DJ is in this category, 5-star, elite quarterback, that he's going to be a lot like Trevor Lawrence. I think DJ is a tremendous weapon. I think that he showed in the Boston College and Notre Dame games last year that there should be 0 concerns about pressure or, is the moment too big for him? That was incredible on every level by any definition. This guy learns on I think it was a Thursday, maybe a Wednesday, but I think it was Thursday before the Boston College game, that he's going to be the starter because Trevor Lawrence is out because of COVID. Also, mind you, he had a bum shoulder. He had injured his shoulder earlier in the year against Miami I think it was on a power running play. And so they took the quarterback run game essentially out of the playbook for those Boston College and Notre Dame games because they were concerned about his shoulder. And so basically you're a dual threat quarterback who's doing it with figuratively one hand tied behind your back. And you do what he did. So that was tremendous by any definition. But I do think there's still some refinements he needs to make. He's still developing as a quarterback, even though he is a great quarterback and is going to be one. I just don't think he's the finished product. Nobody is really. I mean, that Trevor Lawrence was, if that makes sense. But I think they love what they have, and they fully grasp the utter luxury it is to go from Deshaun Watson to to Kelly Bryant, then to Trevor Lawrence, then to DJ Uiagalelei. I mean, the wild thing about covering Clemson football is it seems like every 3 years you say, okay, here's a generational quarterback. Well, a generation at Clemson seems like less than what a generation is defined as everywhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, he's very much of the number one pick 2 years from now type talent. Like the talent is there for him. It's just a matter of obviously putting it together. And what you mentioned about the QB run game is going to be, I think, big within this first game against Georgia. But switching gears to sort of the Clemson defensive side, we talked a little bit about the secondary, but obviously Brent Venables is hoping that, hey, my secondary isn't as much as an issue because I have what I feel is one of the most talented defensive lines in all of college football. Speak to sort of the leap that you think that group is going to take, one, getting other guys back healthy, and then two, Breesy and Murphy in year two.
Yeah, the feeling is that they have on the defensive line, they're back to somewhere close to what they had when they had the Power Rangers back there in 2016 and 18 when they won it all. And speaking of Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Cleveland Farrell, and Austin Bryant. Now, that is some high praise, because that is regal company there when you talk about a totally disruptive defensive line that just basically destroys plays before they even get started. And so I want to make clear that nobody is out there saying these are those guys right now. They're saying that, yes, we have that capability, but that those aforementioned guys set the standard not just with their physical dominance, but also their mental ability and determination to just bring it every single day. And so I think that's sort of the standard that these current guys are being held to. I do think that there is that belief that, and you mentioned, I think you hit on this perfectly, Brent, and that when you look at some of the mini breakdowns they had on the back end against Ohio State, a lot of this stuff goes hand in hand. And so if you look at it wasn't just receivers running free. It was Justin Fields having 5 seconds to find those receivers and for them to get open, to have that time to get open. There was zero pressure in that game, and Clemson was just physically overwhelmed on the line of scrimmage. And I think the belief is that now you have Tyler Davis, who's fully healthy. He was not healthy at all last year, suffered an ankle injury, a high ankle sprain early in the season, had surgery, and was never really close to 100%. You have Brian Brzee beside him, who had a really good year as a freshman, really disruptive, who is more knowledgeable now, is going to be much better against the run, I think, than he was last year. And then you have that freak that you mentioned on the end, and Myles Murphy, who I think is absolutely going to be a star sooner rather than later. And then you have the return of Justin Foster, who had given up football because of a long haul COVID symptoms, but then was got some medical advice from Duke that made him a lot more comfortable about coming back. He's back and back into being in really good shape. And also Xavier Thomas, who has elite pass rushing skills, who is supposedly in the best mental place he's ever been, and also in a great physical place. And so I don't know that I think it's probably a stretch to say the 2021 line is going to be just as great or as disruptive as the 2018 line, but I do believe that they're going to help make both the secondary and the linebackers look and play a lot better just by virtue of being able to control things more often at the line of scrimmage.
Over the next month, we'll have a lot of collaboration with Tiger Illustrated and UGAsports.com, as from both sides, we cover these two teams as we head into this matchup. So, Larry, what I want to do now is kind of like flip this a little bit and kind of throw the hosting duties over to you. And if we end up doing something later on, that's great. It can serve as a tease for your audience. But with this being kind of a cross-platform situation, is there anything that your Clemson fan audience would want to know about Georgia at this point?
Yeah. One thing at the top of my mind is actually just this morning, I was interacting with some folks on our message board. They were reacting to a piece we had the first thing today. And, you know, you have your basket case type fans who, you know, everything hinges on this next thing they hear. It's, you know, it's the second day of camp and, oh my God, we're going to be 8-4 because of this guy doesn't look like what I thought he would, or whatever. I'm exaggerating, of course, but anyway, one subscriber was saying, man, I just don't know how we're going to be able to move the ball against Georgia's defense with some of the issues we have right out of the gates. You know, we're having to depend on so many different development, or sort of a developmental thing, just sort of maybe too many unknowns right now against this defense for me to think we're going to have, you know, we're going to be able to move the ball and score enough points. And then I responded and I said, just keep in mind that there are reasonable Georgia fans on the other side who are saying the exact same thing about their offense and its chances of scoring enough points against Clemson's defense. And so I would ask y'all, is that accurate or maybe not? Or is there a more of a sort of abundant confidence in Georgia's offense right now, being able to do what it needs to do to put enough points on the board to win?
Brent, I'll let you go first on that one.
I would say that's a great question, at least from the fan perspective. I think the fan perspective is confident, but wants to see it. It's just like anything else. It's especially with Georgia in the past, is we think a lot of these things going into it, but actually seeing it are very much different. I think in the end, though, what you said about the development pieces, you know, you look at Clemson's offensive line. It's, you know, you're moving your best player who had played right tackle an entire season now to left tackle. You've got youth in basically some experience, but also youth in a lot of other places, at least from a snap count perspective, going against a very formidable Georgia defensive line. I think looking at the game, and the more I watch of each team on tape, I mean, obviously watched all of Georgia, but the more I watch Clemson on tape, this game feels a lot like kind of the Boston College game, in that how is Clemson going to be successful? They're going to be successful by, one, their defensive front, but then two, putting DJU back in the shotgun, having 4 wide receivers and just letting him spin it all over the place. And then it just becomes who can, and I think that's the ultimate key to this game, is who can protect their quarterback. If whoever protects their quarterback the best, I think that team is going to come out victorious in this game.
Especially with both defensive lines being as stout as they are. And I think that both those are probably the two strongest units in the game as a whole when you get into injuries and recoveries and depth. I just from Georgia fans, in terms of offensive perspective, I think there would be more confidence if George Pickens was available. Obviously, with his ACL injury, that's a big deal because George Pickens at Georgia is viewed like Justyn Ross is at Clemson. That you cannot defend him in a one-on-one situation. He is that kind of guy. You can throw the football up and it will be caught. He is kind of the cheat code when everything else breaks down, that George Pickens could figure it out. With that not there, and then injuries at wide receiver abound beyond that, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saints coming back from a season-ending injury against Florida. Even then, he wasn't proven yet. I think he's on his way to being that. Jermaine Burton had a great freshman season, but Georgia's receivers are going to feel unknown to a national stage, I think. And so while Georgia fans may have confidence in them, like Brent said, I think for Georgia, there's a lot of confidence, but need to kind of see it all come together first. Even with JT Daniels, his situation is actually not too dissimilar to what DJ Uiagalelei, where what we've seen has been great, but we haven't seen it for a lot against the best teams.
Do y'all have I guess yesterday I was doing some reading on Georgia. I saw that Kyrus Jackson did he get hurt or have some surgery over the summer? Is he okay? What does it feel like to y'all?
Yeah, he had a knee scope kind of late in spring ball, and so he's still recovering from that, but he's going to play. He's on track to be fine. He's not fully back practicing yet, but it's expected within the first week of camp that he'll be 100%. And he's a pretty key player in the sense of when you start talking about special teams and reliability, blocking out on the edge. He's known as a physical player, but one thing that Brent and I just finished was a series on Georgia's top returnees based on Pro Football Focus grades. And skill player blocking is something that Georgia must improve on to win a game like against a team like Clemson.
And I haven't broken down any of the metrics, but whenever I watch that dude play, he's a really good player. I wanted to share something with y'all. Earlier this summer, I guess in the midst of all the portal acquisitions from Georgia, I did the math and I went back and added up as of the 2014 game between Clemson and Georgia that was in Athens, that Georgia won 45-21, pulled away in the second half. There were a combined 7 former rivals 5-stars on the field for that game, according to my calculations, which sometimes can be wrong because I'm terrible at math, but I think I add pretty well.
Can we take a guess at this game?
Take a guess.
I would say at minimum 6 times that.
Dayne?
If you total,
I'm trying to think. Well, like what is the?
I'm thinking it's in the 30s.
What's the standard for this? Is it the LSU Alabama like national championship year? Is that the standard for what we're trying to topple here? That would be
I don't know.
Article.
26 is what I came up with.
Okay.
Which is still, I mean, those two teams in 14 were talented. Like, those were not slouches. Like, yeah, Deshaun Watson and Todd Gurley and Michelle and Chubb, right? Michelle and Chubb were there that year, right?
Nick Chubb had a big run down the sideline for a touchdown.
Yeah, but see, one of the differences with Georgia under Kirby Smart is just the overall talent on offensive line, for sure, compared to the last few years of the Mark Richt era. That's where the recruiting has really surged. And then I would say in the secondary as well. Georgia did not have trouble finding, especially running backs, but even some of the receivers would be really talented. Georgia had the weapons on offense. It was more of a depth issue. And when injuries would happen, it could derail Georgia's seasons. But, I think Georgia fans, Larry, are probably jealous of Clemson in the sense that Clemsoning used to be a thing, right? That Clemson would have a lead against a team that they could beat, and then it fall away in the last second, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're 9-3 at the end of the season. You wonder how that happened, and it seems like Georgia has moved beyond that stage, but Georgia hasn't gotten to that national championship glory yet, even with the one appearance against Alabama, the game that did go to overtime. So I think Georgia fans view Clemson with jealousy in that sense, and probably just, frankly, a little jealousy that the schedule is easier down the road.
Well, I've sort of in occasionally in recent years I've made a point to note the difference between the two in terms of those matchups with Alabama, and I do think that once Georgia, if and when they do break through, then they'll be a mainstay, and then it'll be easier to, once you've learned how to do it, once it's a part of your culture, then I think it stands to reason that you're a more assured, I guess, of yourself resident of that class. But I swear, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my belief is you look at those two times that Georgia tripped up in the SEC championship and the national championship game. I distinctly remember, and I'm sure Georgia fans don't need to be told this or reminded of this, but in both of those games, Alabama was absolutely reeling and just one punch away from getting knocked out. And Georgia could not do it. And
2 plays.
Absolutely. I mean, you got Alabama.
Alabama in the national championship year, I think if Tua gets sacked on 3rd and 9 or something like that, that's 2 straight 3-and-outs. and maybe they go back to Hurts, and I think Alabama is beyond crushed in that game.
Yeah,
but he breaks out of a sack from some unknown way, gets it rolling, eventually scores, whole new game. And then in the 18 game, the missed field goal from Rodrigo Blankenship. I think that was massive.
And then a lot of this stuff is forgotten, but in that national championship game, you got Alabama's one of their defensive linemen is fighting with a coach on the sideline. Like they're in disarray, or apparently in disarray, I guess you could say. But my point is, they were on the verge of everything falling apart. Georgia was not good enough to land that knockout punch, to land that one or two plays that are the difference between a close loss, and a 24-point win. Clemson was good enough to land that knockout punch and to destroy Alabama in 2018. Clemson was good enough in 2016 to go the distance against maybe the best college defense I've ever seen. That 2016 defense. And so that's really the difference between the two, and the difference between Clemson fans being able to look over to Athens and laugh and mock and to make fun of them, and Georgia fans sort of quietly hoping that things are able to turn.
Well, as we close and kind of start to wrap up here, so let's look at then this moving forward and this game and this opening game. How much do you think this opening game impacts the college football playoff? For example, to me, if you're Clemson, one, you win, you're like pencil in. To me, your pen and pen Sharpie in the playoff. But if you lose this game to Georgia, does it open up the realm of possibilities that, hey, down the line, maybe you got where it's Georgia and Clemson for that last spot, and Georgia has the victory?
I think it absolutely shapes perception moving through the season. If Georgia wins that game, and I'm speaking about Clemson here, because the elephant in the room, I mean, you just can't get around it. The ACC, until further notice, this schedule not pretty for Clemson.
No, it's Penn. They're winning it. It's Sharpie. They're in the playoff if you beat Georgia, I think.
And now things can change, I mean, you could have some teams rise up and make the ACC better than people think it's going to be. But back to the perception, people are tired of Clemson being there all the time. And so they're going to be quicker, I think, over the course of the season in this hypothetical scenario to say, oh, gosh, what's Clemson done? They don't belong. They lost to Georgia. I don't know if that perception would influence the selection committee, so I don't know if it even would really mean anything.
I think that perception is too much owned by Notre Dame with playoff performances. So I think Clemson may have a little grace if Notre Dame's in the mix.
Right, and yeah, I do think though there will be uncertainty moving to the year. Although it's still hard for me to envision a one-loss ACC champion Clemson team whose bona fides have long since been proven being left out. But another sort of aspect of this, I think that is interesting and creates some, I guess, pressure. I don't know if that's the word, but Clemson, its last two times on the playoff stage has gotten embarrassed, and two different types of embarrassments, because I think against LSU, even though LSU won that game handily, Clemson was in really good position for a good part of that game, and it played really well against an otherworldly LSU team compared to this past year where the bottom just fell out and they were physically overwhelmed in every way. But the point is, since 2018, when they won 44-16, and it was reasonable to think or to ask the question, has Dabo Swinney, has Clemson and Dabo Swinney eclipsed Alabama and Nick Saban? I mean, people were saying that, and I think it was reasonable. But since then, Alabama has sort of reasserted itself, and Clemson has gotten boat raced in a couple of playoff games. And so I think in that sense, in that big stage SEC team top 5 matchup perspective, I think a lot of folks, including Clemson fans, are looking at it going, okay, let's see what you have. Let's see if if this program is still sort of up to that lofty level.
It's going to be an interesting Saturday, the first Saturday of September, when Clemson and Georgia play in Charlotte. Larry, we can't thank you enough for your time. So whether fans listening to this through TigerIllustrated.com or with us over at UGAsports.com, make sure you subscribe to what we're doing on our sites and check us out on Twitter. Larry, you're at Larry Williams TI. Great follow for Clemson content for the next month for the Georgia audience that we have here. Again, can't thank you enough, and looking forward to the many collaborations that our sites will have here in the next few weeks. And, if things go as I think we all probably think they will, there's a good chance that Georgia and Clemson are both in the playoff mix come season's end.
Yeah, could be a rematch. A lot of exciting things to talk about and write about for sure.